Hello and welcome to the India Briefing. I am Mukulika Banerjee and I'm joined here by my co-host Pragya Tiwari in Delhi. In this episode, we thought we would focus on the most urgent issue in the capital of India, New Delhi, where Pragya is. Of course, Pragya, tell us what is going on. Why is everybody talking about the hideous pollution levels in Delhi today? What does it feel like? What's going on?
Mukulika, as you know, this happens every winter in Delhi when Delhi is covered in smog. This year, it's been particularly bad, or perhaps with age, one is feeling the impact particularly harshly. But of course, people like ourselves are privileged. We move largely in cars, and we are indoors. We work indoors. We have air purifiers on everywhere we go, even if we're going to someone else's house or going to a hotel or going somewhere else, air purifiers are on. And despite that, the last week or so has been absolutely frightening. When you look out the window, it's just a sort of blackish yellow that you can see. You can barely see. Forget about the horizon. You can barely see what's right in front of you. The tree right in front of my home is completely invisible. And irrespective of what measures we're taking, air purifiers are on in cars and in homes, and we're wearing masks and the whole lot. But we've all been suffering. I've been suffering from terrible headaches. My throat is gone. My eyes have been burning. And one can't even imagine what people who don't have the kind of privilege that we have are going through.
So, I grew up in Delhi and I remember, and now when one hears of people visiting Delhi, November to February is actually the golden time in terms of temperatures. It is meant to be winter. This is when tourism picks up and so on. And yet, this is exactly the time when the quality of air is so bad that people are seriously wondering whether they should be visiting Delhi, given, and foreign correspondents have been writing about it in their papers. People have been posting it on social media and so on. So one thing about Delhi, which has always been a problem, it's not a recent problem, it's a geographical issue, that Delhi is based in the Gangetic Plain, and it is on the west, it is flanked by a mountain range. In the north, it is flanked by a mountain range. So it's a sort of basin in which the air accumulates and it has nowhere to go. And at this time of the year, in late autumn, of course, the paddy crop has been harvested and the stumps are in the fields of Haryana and Punjab, which are right next to Delhi. And those stumps are burnt, right? So the haze that is created through the crop burning adds to this still air in this basin. And then, of course, the biggest festival of Diwali happens in the beginning of November around this time. And yes, Diwali is a festival of light, but it is also celebrated by everybody by bursting fireworks. And these are not like, city level fireworks. Every household, every home has firecrackers and they burst them, and each of them creates smoke and a haze. So it's these three things. It's the perfect storm, isn't it? This is why November is so bad in Delhi.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add one thing to this, which is that so what happens during the winter months, Delhi, of course, is in a sort of basin and that's year round, that's where it is. But in the winter months, what happens is as the temperatures drop, the wind velocity becomes even less. So there is barely any breeze that's carrying these pollutants out of out of the city boundaries and dispersing them. Now, this year we had a very prolonged monsoon, which means that the monsoon, its exit was delayed. And when monsoon exits, we typically have anticyclonic weather, which is sort of associated with high pressure conditions and again, very slow wind velocity. Now, that leading to lower temperatures has made it worse. Now, La Nina was expected to set in. It's a worldwide weather phenomenon that is associated, amongst other things, with higher wind velocities. And perhaps that was playing on the mind of policymakers. So they thought that these sort of, that could benefit us in terms of the levels of pollution. But despite it being predicted to set in mid-year, it still hasn't set in. And there isn't a clear consensus about why this is happening, but that's also been a factor perhaps in sort of a lag in policy response. And yes, absolutely, stubble burning and firecrackers, we will come to firecrackers, of course, ban. It's a ban that's not obviously completely observed. But these are exacerbating conditions, and we will come to them. It's a they are very, very important, but sometimes they're also sort of the boogeymen. There's a much more foundational reason why we have such bad air quality throughout the year.
So, okay, so let's go back to the basics. AQI, Air
Yeah.
Quality Index, that is the way the air quality of any city in the world is measured, right? So what is AQI in Delhi at the moment?
So AQI in Delhi, let me just give you the year average, right? Like on average in the non-winter months, it's roughly 200. All right. Um, in winter, it's usually between 300 and 400. Now, the last 8 days, the air quality has been extremely hazardous. And this is the interesting part. According to the measures released by the government, which is the Central Board of Pollution Control, they've been close to 500. But private measurements say that they've been overshooting 1,000 constantly. And the reason for this is that the CBPC caps measurement at 500. So they don't measure beyond 500. So they are simply saying that it's reached the maximum that we measure it. But private measurements were putting it at absolutely alarming levels for 7, 8 straight days. And today we have some reprieve, by which we mean that it's come down to very poor quality, and it's touching 400, but that's where we are at today. So that's what we are calling reprieve in that sense. And it's also interesting that I mean, technically it's very poor, right? And that's, if you want to understand what 379, which is like the reprieve we've got today, really means, Beijing today is at 142, Dhaka is at 190, Singapore is under 50, and so are Washington, D.C. and London.
So, and permissible AQI limits for decent health should be 0 to 50, right? So 50 to 100, sort of acceptable.
Yeah.
But so what you're saying about 379 to 1,000 is off the charts pollution. This is why it is the single most important issue in India's national capital. And of course, the AQI, as you were saying, I mean, it's caused by a number of different factors: ground level, ozone, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide. These are all the gases that we are talking about. So this is seriously noxious air. And then there is particulate matter 2.5, PM10. These are the ones that are found most in Delhi's air. What is causing these? What are the main causes, do you think? Do we know?
So, Mukul, like I was saying earlier, we talk about farm fires, firecrackers. Now, they're short-lived. They do exacerbate the situation. But year-round, we have any number of other very serious causes of pollution. The number one thing that comes to my mind is vehicular pollution. Now, measures have been taken in this regard. Delhi's state public transport has moved to CNG, which is cleaner fuel, but there are not nearly enough buses. And there is progress when it comes to tech in cars, in private vehicles, with regards to, cleaner fuel. But that's offset by the fact that we're adding any number of new vehicles every single year to the city. I mean, in 2023, official estimates say 650,000 new vehicles were added to Delhi. So they kind of offset whatever benefits we could see from cleaner tech with regards to fuel and so on. Then another major factor is that a staggering amount of waste is also burned in Delhi every single day. Now, this includes open burning. So if you, in parts of Delhi, you see small piles of garbage being burnt. There is burning on landfills. There are enormous landfills around Delhi, and people set fire to them for waste management. And then there are waste to energy incinerators. Now, just the incinerators burn about 8,000 tons of waste every single day. And what these incinerators release is such a toxic cocktail of particulate matter and hazardous gases. So that's again a huge source. And again, as we know, India is largely dependent on coal when it comes to its energy needs. And I'll just give you a number, but coal-fired thermal power plants in and around Delhi emitted 281 kilotons of sulfur dioxide between June 2022 and May 2023. Now, India remains the largest emitter of SO2 sulfur dioxide globally, accounting for over 20% of human caused emissions worldwide. So, sorry, I was reading there. You'll have to excuse that. But that is just staggering, right? But such is our need for fuel and energy that these are the kind of numbers we are seeing now, and we don't see this decreasing. And we can come to this a bit later, but the need for energy is only going to keep going. So whatever measures are taken, again, they're offset by the fact that the need for energy keeps growing.
And there are the two probably additional factors. I mean, Delhi is very dusty. Anyone who has spent any time in Delhi will know it is a naturally dusty city. It sits in the middle of the Indo-Gangetic Plain. There is also the huge issue of industrial pollution, right? So a while ago, industries were moved out of the city to protect pollution levels, but of course they've set up right outside the borders, and the wind carries it into the city anyway, so that hasn't really made a difference. And poverty is, a recurring theme when we are thinking about, you said it in at the start, that there is, of course, a small, wealthier middle class that is able to protect itself through a number of measures.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, anyone visiting Delhi in the winter months, and this has been the case always, and if anything, the numbers have increased, you see poor people who sleep rough, who are sleeping on pavements in this absolute bitter cold. And for people who don't realize this, people think of India as a hot country, but Delhi winters are seriously cold. It could dips to 0 degrees sometimes, and certainly 0 to 5 is pretty normal. In those kind of winters with absolutely no reprieve, people sleeping rough, burn little fires, and you see people huddled in shawls, warming their hands over those fires. And all those hundreds and thousands of little fires are also contributing to that overall pollution. But without doubt, I mean, the big players, the big industries just outside the border of Delhi, the big incinerators, these are creating, the volume that they are creating is completely of a different scale.
Okay.
So if one had to look at what this high AQI does to human health, what are the worst effects of this polluted air? According to WHO, air pollution causes 6.7 million premature deaths. This was 2019. Of this 6.7 million, 4.2 million was because of outdoor pollution. And 89%, really most of these cases, are happening in low-income countries. So this is a really skewed global picture, right? Poor countries, low quality air, and a high number, therefore, of premature deaths.
Yeah.
What are the figures like in Delhi?
So in Delhi, the figures claim that roughly 12,000 deaths annually are caused by air pollution. But of course, these things, as you know, there are many confounding factors, so these are not very easy to measure. So the numbers could be well above that. But there is a research that has found that exposure as short as 48 hours to elevated degrees of particles could lessen life expectancy at a collective level. And there is no moment in time in Delhi, forget about winter months, when PM 2.5 and PM 10 are not much higher than WHO approved levels.
And so these high AQI levels, basically the most serious diseases are cardiovascular, they're respiratory diseases and infections, and of course, cancer. And as always, as we've been saying, those on lower incomes, people who don't have secure housing or access to any kind of protection or purifiers, are the ones who have the highest cases of asthma. Elderly people with weaker immunity are much worse hit. And really worryingly, children growing up, children of all age classes, are growing up with impaired, stunted lung development because of this toxic air.
Absolutely. And if you want, you want another perspective from which to understand what kind of health impacts we're looking at, there are these figures that are being circulated in the media right now, which is that living in Delhi right now is the equivalent of smoking 40 to 50 cigarettes a day. So think about everything, all the diseases that are associated with smoking. And, in that sort of pumped up way. And that's what you're really looking at if you are a citizen in Delhi.
So this is all very bleak. It's deeply worrying, but there is a government. India is a democracy. Governments are meant to be responding and governing well, democracy or not. So let's look at what the government has actually done about this, right? We hear of all kinds of things, school closures, construction industry being closed down. There is the Graded Response Action Plan, GRAP, as it's called. Yeah, there are a number of different measures that have been put in. Vehicular traffic has been curtailed. Industries have been asked to stop. Heavy trucks can't enter the city during the day. Is any of this paying off? What is GRAP looking like? Are people feeling the impact of it?
So we're at the highest level of GRAP, which is GRAP 4. This is the highest level at which they can respond in terms of an emergency protocol. And what it involves is schools have to be shut. There are restrictions with respect to workplace attendance. You spoke about trucks, heavy trucks not coming in. Construction activity has been stopped. There are restrictions on vehicular movement and so on. And perhaps it has paid off. I mean, like we were saying earlier, the causes of pollution are so complex and there's an interplay of so many different factors that perhaps it is in response to GRAP that we have gone down from extremely hazardous to very poor air quality today. There's at least some amount of sun that you can see in the sky today. Or perhaps it's a weather phenomenon that this has happened. But what is really important to bear in mind is that GRAP is only an emergency measure. GRAP can only help ameliorate the sort of extremely hazardous conditions that we found ourselves in the last 6 or 7 days. But like I'm not clearly tiring of repeating, even today at 394 or 400, we're not in a safe environment. So while GRAP is still on today, it's not something that you can keep on for long periods of time because kids are out of school, there are economic costs and so on. So sooner or later, they will have to de-escalate this response. But it's going to be not nearly enough done in terms of actually addressing the issue.
So when we say what is the government doing, why has nothing been done, it would be unfair to say that nothing's been done. Something's been done, but like you're saying, they're term measures, they're short-term measures, right? So you can keep children at home, you can shut down schools, but you can't do this indefinitely. And I think as research is showing more and more, it's not as if keeping children indoors is necessarily making them immune to, obviously, the air quality. I mean, this is inside and outside the home. Things are bad. And then it brings on attendant issues. Having children at home affects the workforce. How long can people have children at home? Suddenly, children who rely on midday meals in school are no longer going to school. Therefore, they are at home and need to be fed. And they often belong to families who are working in industries like construction, which, when you shut down, those daily wage construction workers are not paid. So the knock-on effect of these short-term measures are really severe for labor participation at all levels, but definitely for the majority of the population. So while we've seen things like public transport being the big measure to move to CNG was introduced, but if the population of Delhi is mostly, or the population on the roads, the vehicular traffic on roads is mostly private cars, this is never going to. So we need a much bigger game change, right? We need a game changer measure than just tinkering with numbers here and there, and a much better regulation on fuel emission, which again is not in place. But
Absolutely.
why, Pragya, why is this not? I mean, Delhi is a strange kind of political entity, isn't it? It's the central government is not entirely in charge in Delhi. Who is making the decisions about these things? Even though the central government sits in Delhi, the state of Delhi has a more federal administrative structure.
Yeah, so obviously this is heightened in Delhi because Delhi, like you said, has a particularly complex political governance structure. But even outside of Delhi, pollution falls within the remit of state governments as well as the central government. And very often there is a sort of, due to the nature of politics, there isn't consensus between these governments on who is responsible for what. And as if you're reading the newspapers, you will see that Delhi government and the central government in Delhi are, there's a blame game going on about who was responsible for what we've witnessed in the last week. Add to that, there's policy confusion, which emerges from this sort of standoff. For example, the state government has been trying to hold the central government accountable and saying that we need to induce artificial rain, but then scientists are not very sure that this is an efficient, system. In any case, it's a short-term measure. Again, then there are policy implementation issues, when policies do come into place. So, for example, the National Clean Air Program, NCAP, which was launched in 2019, and it targets 100 cities. And the aim is to drastically reduce pollution by 2026. Now, the reason why a lot of scientists will tell you that this is not exactly a scientific program, it's a badly designed program, is because it focuses on cities. Now, even if you look at Delhi, only one third of its pollution is coming from within the state, what we call the national capital region. Only one third of the pollution is coming from there. But if Delhi wants to implement a ban on farm fires, the Delhi government cannot do that. And Punjab and Haryana perhaps are reluctant to do that because farmers are a big voter base. So experts have been saying that what we really need is a sort of air shred management system where we look at parts of the country as zones and there is far greater coordination between states and between cities so that this can be addressed sort of more holistically. So there are these sort of gaps both in policy formulation and implementation. So, despite good intentions, it doesn't actually translate to any results. And there are any number of examples of this. I mean, this sort of like halfway house when it comes to policy formulation and implementation. Even when industry was being moved out of Delhi, they allocated an area which was not very far from Delhi, so would have impacted Delhi in any case, but didn't have the requisite infrastructure. So even if people were to bear the cost and move industry there, they wouldn't find the infrastructure they need to operate and so on.
And also there is, so, what you're saying is that there is a lack of vision, a lack of policy vision. It's unlikely that there is no policy thinking on it or recommendations. There are plenty of people. There's excellent research going on in India. There are good people to design these things, but there has to be the alignment of political will, policy vision, and there is undeniably political and administrative corruption as well, who is allowed to keep their incinerators going and so on. And perhaps somewhere at an individual level, a collective action issue. If there is a ban on firecrackers during Diwali, unless every single person understands that they need to do this, the outcome is not going to be affected. And so we need, it's bizarre really, given it's, so much of India is political and issues become political and become big election issues. Air quality and air pollution in the National Capital Region simply hasn't gained that kind of traction during elections. Perhaps that's the only time then there will be change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when it doesn't become an election issue, when it is not politicized, you can expect that politicians are going to prioritize issues that are politicized. And in India, when you make policy, it's a very complex country. It's a very densely populated country. It's a very diverse country. It's a developing country. So, like we were talking about earlier, GRAP 4 is in place, which means construction activity has stopped in the city, but which also means that construction workers, and you briefly mentioned this, but I think it bears repeating, that construction workers are out on a limb. These are daily wage laborers. They eat what they earn on any given day. Now, all of a sudden, their livelihood is being taken away. There is no mechanism for compensation in place, either privately or through the government, at least no adequate compensation mechanism. Add to that, a lot of their kids are home right now, so there are more mouths to feed. They can't fall back on midday meal schemes, etc. And it goes without saying that they are incensed. They are very, very incensed. So on the one hand, big industry is perhaps incensed because of the economic impact on them due to these measures. And then you also have the poorer and weaker sections of the society that are incensed. So at any given point in time, politicians are trying to figure out, what favors their re-election better. We know this in terms of understanding political cycles. So unless this is politicized, unless this becomes a very important, salient sort of election issue, and politicians see that they will or will not get votes depending on how they perform on this measure, and particularly when it comes to long-term measures to curb pollution, I don't see how we can move the needle on this.
And what we haven't said, but is implicit in so much of this story on Delhi's toxic air, is the big story of climate change. We cannot, at this stage, it's impossible to imagine India's massive energy needs being met by sources that are not coal-reliant. And that is having a knock-on effect on everything. And this is the current manifestation of it.
Yeah, and the circular relationship that climate change actually has with pollution is not very well understood, because on the one hand, like we mentioned in the beginning, unpredictable weather conditions are making it harder to predict pollution levels, to manage pollution levels, and so on. But on the other hand, particular chemicals in the air are also, particularly black carbon and methane, they're also increasing global warming. So it has this sort of circular effect on global warming, where it's being made worse by global warming, and in turn is making global warming worse.
So we can wrap that up for now. I think we are going to keep an eye on this story, not least for me sitting in London with relatively much cleaner air, where in fact there have been measures here. It's become an election issue. The ultra-low emission zone introduced by the Mayor of London made it a really live, hot issue here. And he managed to push it through. Successive mayors have done this. But I'm worried about Pragya. I'm worried about family and friends, but also everybody in Delhi who is living in this absolute toxic oven at the moment. So we're going to keep an eye on the story. We might do another episode on this. I should also say there's academic research coming out. People are looking at issues of why air pollution hasn't become an election issue. What is the climate change story on this? And so we will come back to this in the future. But in the
Yeah.
meanwhile, sorry, yes.
No, I was just going to add that, in fact, one of the things that frustrates us people living in Delhi so much is that this is an issue in the media and with the government only for these 2 months when things get out of hand, and then come February, March, when the sun is out and Delhi has its sort of blooms everywhere, people just completely forget about this as an issue, and not enough is done in those months. But November unfailingly arrives and we find ourselves back here. So, Mukulika, I hope you and me are not going to fall prey to that. And through the year, we're going to keep having this conversation. Like you said, there is great research that's coming out. Perhaps we can get academics who are working on this. Siddharth Singh has written a wonderful book on this, which I highly recommend. Perhaps we can have experts like him come and talk to us and build on one another's thoughts and ideas to perhaps come up with something more hopeful than what we've come up with today.
And there is a working paper in progress at the moment by Tariq Tachil and Shikhar Singh at Penn looking at why this has not become an election issue. So all these good people could be brought on at a slightly later stage. But in the meanwhile, to all of you listening, please do write to us at tib@oijo.in, and please support us by liking, subscribing, and most importantly, sharing this episode if you've liked. Thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye.